Hi guys, this is Miss Morgan, and in this video we're going to talk about the biogeochemical cycles. Bio for life, geo because this includes the geography of an ecosystem, and chemical because we're going to be tracing carbon and nitrogen. All right, so your driving questions are, how does carbon move through an ecosystem? And number 2, how does nitrogen move through an ecosystem? We're going to worry about that third question in class. So let's start by going all the way back to middle school. I know, it's okay. We're not going to stay there long. Test your knowledge. See if you can draw or talk through the water cycle on your own. Are you looking for the answers? They're not here, so pause the video and try to describe the water cycle on your own, guys. All right. Well, you didn't think we'd leave you without the key. So here's the water cycle, and you can check and see how you did. So let's talk carbon cycle. First question, in what form is most carbon found in the environment? Well, most carbon is found as carbon dioxide. But carbon is also found in things like glucose, as well as lipids, which are long carbon chains, proteins, nucleic acids, and other molecules. And we're going to talk about these 4 types of molecules later on this year. So here's the carbon cycle. So first we start with atmospheric CO2. And we also have dissolved CO2 in water. Oceans, rivers, as well as plants act as what we call carbon sinks. And carbon sinks store excess CO2. So here we have a little rabbit. This little rabbit is going to donate CO2 to the atmosphere through respiration. We breathe out CO2. We also have the burning of carbon-laden fuels. So we have a factory and we have a car, and they're going through a process called combustion that is going to be combusting fossil fuels such as oil and coal and releasing that into the atmosphere as CO2. This little campfire isn't burning fossil fuels, but it is burning wood, which is made primarily of carbon. So as that carbon burns, it gets converted into CO2. Next, we have our little plant here. And our little plant, like we said, is a carbon sink. So that plant is going to go through the process of photosynthesis and actually take in a lot of that atmospheric CO2. And it's going to convert that into sugars that it's going to use for food, but those sugars will also be transferred to the living animals through the process of consuming on the food chain. The plants will also die, and their carbon that's inside of their organism will be converted to fossil fuels over millions of years if conditions are right. However, plants also donate CO2 back to the environment as well because they do go through the process of respiration. So with dissolved CO2, remember our lakes, our rivers, those are all carbon sinks. So they're going to pick up atmospheric carbon when the water churns. But we also have this little plant and this little fish here that are going through photosynthesis for the plant and respiration for both. So the plant's going to take up dissolved CO2 and both are going to release CO2 into the water. So atmospheric CO2 and dissolved CO2 can go straight back and forth between each other because, like I was saying, as the rivers and lakes churn, you're going to have some atmospheric CO2 get pulled into the water, or you're going to have some CO2 get released. And that's just a natural process that happens. So this is what the carbon cycle looks like. And this is more of a scientific drawing as opposed to our step-by-step drawing we just made. All right, let's talk nitrogen cycle now. You need to know that there are 2 forms of nitrogen in the environment. There's usable nitrogen and unusable nitrogen. Usable nitrogen can be immediately used by living organisms. So these include nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia. You don't have to know the specific types. You just need to know that there are certain kinds that are usable. Unusable nitrogen is nitrogen that can't be immediately used by living organisms. Again, you don't need to know the specifics, but you do need to know that unusable nitrogen has to be changed into a form that is usable before it can interact with the living portions of the environment. And the process that converts unusable nitrogen into a usable form is called nitrogen fixation. So nitrogen fixation is going to be accomplished by bacteria or very rarely, but it does happen, lightning. So let's talk through the nitrogen cycle. Like I said, you have nitrogen that exists in the atmosphere, and then you also have nitrogen that exists on the ground and underground, and those can be in usable or unusable forms. Remember, lightning as well as bacteria can go through the process of nitrogen fixation to convert unusable N2 into the different usable forms that living organisms can take up. So once this bacteria converts unusable nitrogen into a usable form, that's taken up into the plant, typically through the roots, and the plant uses what it needs. Animals get this usable nitrogen by eating the plants or by eating another animal that has eaten plants. So our little cow here is going to use up nitrogen. That nitrogen is going to be changed as it's used up. And then that organism is going to release the nitrogen that it doesn't use. And that nitrogen is going to be released as, oh, yay, poop, right? Cow patties. So how do we get rid of all of that cow poop? Well, we have decomposers that break that down. So that could be fungi, that could be bacteria. And as those decomposers break that poop down, or any decaying organism really, they're going to take any of the nitrogen that's there. If it's unusable, they're going to fix that nitrogen and return it into the cycle. So our decomposers are going to send that unusable nitrogen back into the system. Unusable nitrogen will get fixed by bacteria again, and the cycle continues. Now, occasionally, nitrogen that's in the ground or underground goes through a process called denitrification. And denitrification takes usable forms of nitrogen and converts it back to atmospheric nitrogen that's unusable. So we have both processes happening, both fixation and denitrification. Remember, though, the important thing is some types of nitrogen are usable, and they are made usable by nitrogen fixation, and the organisms that typically do that are bacteria and some fungi. So here's a nice scientific, beautiful drawing of the nitrogen cycle. See if you can look at this and identify the things we just talked about. And that's it for our Cycles of Nature notes. If you have questions, guys, remember, write them down and submit them to your teacher so that we can get those questions answered in class. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day.